Well, folks, we're going to go into the Schmidt's cash store. My grandfather and my great-grandfather bought out an 1880s grocery store in 1922. In other words, the store had been established in 1880s, and they bought it in 1922. So there are a lot of old things. As they modernized, they put the old stuff in the basement as I grew up and took it. Like these showcases. We have some more if you come back and do some restoration for us. We got plenty of things like that we can add to this collection. The cash register was in my grandfather's store, as well as the clock over there that we'll talk about there in a few minutes. The grocery store was in a little town north of Lincoln, Nebraska, called Valparaiso. And that's where I had my first museum when I was 4 years old growing up there. And no, I was 8 when I had my first museum, and I started collecting at age 4. And so anyway, what I'd like to talk about here is the clock that's over there on the wall. The clock was in my grandfather's store, and it dates 1887 to 1896 when the company went out of business. But they were free to merchants for advertising. And that one's advertising Five Brothers Tobacco, etc. But what's interesting is that every time my grandfather painted in the store, he painted that clock. So there were at least 3 coats of ivory paint on that clock. It got so you could barely see the pendulum. But if you look there, you can see the gold leaf there in the glass that was uncovered when I stripped that clock of that paint. What's interesting is that clock, those circles on there with the writing are paper mache. So the clock itself is a wooden case, but these circles on there were pressed out with heat in the factory with whatever lettering and advertising you wanted to put on it. So try to strip paint off of cardboard. It's very time-consuming and hard to do. But my grandfather said he never had any work done on that clock. It has always run perfectly. And I've never had any work done on it. But I attribute the last 50, 60 years, gosh, I'm getting old, 50, 60 years to rattlesnake rattles. And in there is a fresh set of rattles, and they secrete oil, and that lubricates the clock. And it penetrates the air and lubricates the clock. A lot of people have heard of that. And if any of you have a set of rattles, we need a fresh set, and they do dry out. So anyway, if you have a pendulum clock, like one over here, my grandmother had a little can of kerosene with a rag hanging out of it, and it attracts the dust. Dust gets in everything. It doesn't matter how tight the case is or anything like that. The dust will still get in there. But if you put in kerosene, a little can with a rag, it'll attract that dust. And people don't like that smell, but you remember kerosene lanterns all had kerosene in them, which, you know, people aren't wanting to smell that smell today, but it was popular back then. So people today put cotton balls in their clock and with rubbing alcohol. Many of the bottles of condiments and stuff like that, and the cans are original. Many are reproduction labels from Leadville, Colorado that date around 1878 to 1883, and a man found them under a home, tons of them, and he was able to find enough cans alike that he was able to piece the pieces of the deteriorated labels together and copy them, and we were able to get a set of those labels from him, which was wonderful, as a matter of fact. So anyway, all of these items over here are all original. The few cans over there have some copied labels. So the mannequin over there, Juan Jose, or whatever you want to call him, is from Silverton Dry Goods Store, and it's paper mache. And when I purchased it, the nose was broken off, the mustache was broken off, and a hole in the tie, and I restored him. But I think he's probably much earlier than Silverton, or at least the age of the early Silverton, from a Denver dry goods store. In the back there we have the back room, you know, the storage of bulk supplies and things like that, and the old safe. The old safes from the Ridgeway Mercantile, as a matter of fact. So back over here, we have some corn planters, and if you look, the middle one has an extra bin, and that's for manure. So when you poke that in the ground, it would put a little bit of manure with the corn kernel. And so you, sir, you know, do you have a son? Okay. Anyway, you would be out there plowing with a horse and a plow. Now, you might be a little bit high or something and have a crooked row, but your son would be behind you and he would be shackled like a prisoner. So he could only step so far to plant the corn, you see. And so anyway, you know, it was probably a rope, not metal shackles like a prisoner. But anyway, that's how you kept the spacing between the stalks of corn. The post office over here is from Valparaiso. It was across from my grandfather's store. And you can see it has two sides to it. If you look and go around the corner over there, you'll see the earlier 1880s version with the different type boxes. And this section here was added on in 1902. And in 1965, I went back to my hometown of Valparaiso to visit, and went to get my grandmother's mail, and there was a brand new post office. And I said to the postmaster, whom I knew, what happened to the old one? Oh, it's out on the Martin farm in the creek. And in Christmas of 1965, I chipped it out of the ice and saved it and brought it here. Now the one window over there was used for the telegraph and packages, and this one over here was for stamps and stagecoach tickets. So anyway, we've saved that otherwise would be gone, like many of these artifacts. Over here we have a row of Edison light bulbs, and they still all active and would work. And we have old radio tubes. This is an interesting item here that's patented in 1898. My grandfather sold shoes. And shoes, leather shoes back then were pretty much all the same. So women would get corns or bunions or whatever you call them. And so my grandfather would, after their shoes were purchased, he'd go in there and squeeze and tighten the leather, or loosen the leather, so it'd fit better around those things, those corns and bunions. So clever little gadget. So we have shoes, we have pottery. They sold a little bit of everything in a cash store. Feed and grain, harness, everything you can imagine. I think that wraps it up, unless you have some questions. Otherwise, we'll move along. All right, so we'll move along, and if the last one would close the door behind them, and we'll move on and maybe go see the doctor across the street.